In this second letter, Paul has already encouraged the Christians at Corinth to complete the grace of God, that is, the contribution. To finish it up, they had promised to do so, and he had, writing this second letter, strongly encouraging them to make good on that promise. He, in fact, had sent men in to help them get that contribution up. But he also addresses a much more sinister and dubious problem that had begun to plague, actually, the church at Corinth, it seems. He pleads with them to open their hearts to him. Now, he was their father in the gospel. He had come in and done dangerous work, really, among them. There was great persecutions at the time, persecutions in that city. He landed in that city as a result of persecutions. But Christ told him to stay there because he had much people there. And so Paul did what the Lord asked him to do and continued to work there among the brethren. Hard work, difficult work, he did without at times. And so he pleads with them in this letter to open their hearts to him, he says, and he explained to them, I haven't done anything to harm you guys. Now, he's contrasting, I believe, even back as far back as this chapter here, chapter 7, really what is going on among them, that they actually had those among them who were, in fact, doing them harm. I believe now we can see at this juncture what he's really been talking about, undertones of it from the very beginning of this letter. To open their hearts to him, to let their affections lie where they ought to be, not to misplace them in people who are up to no good. He says at 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 2, we've wronged no one. We've corrupted no one, and we've cheated no one. He says, you're not restricted by us, at chapter 6, verse 12, he says, but you're restricted by your own affections. Now that happens a lot of times. God's people, they blame the very people who are trying to help them, who are trying to love them, who've shown them love. However, they embrace those who pat them on the back, who flatter them, who boast in physical, fleshly things among them. You know, you feel good when people say good things about you. You may not be doing much as a Christian, but they think you're great. Boy, you great. And so they embrace those. Now, these wouldn't dare point out an error that you might teach. They wouldn't dare correct you. They just tell you how good you are, how wonderful you are. And by the way, how wonderful we must be, right? And they go along with that, and that sounds good and all. And that's what Paul is battling at Corinth without question. He's facing this. These have come in and infiltrated, right, his territory. That's what he's talking about at chapter 10. They've come in and taken credit for things that Paul and other workers, good gospel workers and preachers, have done among them. Now, these commend themselves, and they take credit. Paul says, now, we don't dare measure ourselves beyond measure. But he says that is taking glorying in another man's labors. That's what these were doing, because Paul had started that work. He had got them on the right track, and he said, I presented you as a chaste virgin to Jesus Christ. See, I come in and I cleaned your lives up. And we worked hard to make sure that you were chaste and pure as we presented you to Jesus Christ, because that's what he wants. He died, see, that he might cleanse her and sanctify her by the washing of water And that's what Christ has done. That's what he does through Paul and men like him. He cleans up people. Well, Paul was afraid that what has happened is now these would come in and mess all that up. And he describes a certain jealousy he has just in that regard. Now, he calls it a godly jealousy. And then he talks about, now he's not behind any of these super apostles, these most eminent ones, these great, great, great ones, he says. We're not behind them in any way. And so there's this plea, you see, to decide who is it are you going to follow? See? And his fear was he'd seen evidence somehow because he identifies that they had actually subjected themselves to this kind, the shenanigans of these that had come in and infiltrated the church there. Now, I use the word infiltrate because it was under false pretenses. They're pretenders. He had mentioned them, remember, at 2 Corinthians 5? See, I wanted to give you an opportunity to commend us so you'd have an answer, he says at verse 12, for those who boast in appearance and not in heart. See, that these people, they boasters, but see, it's not because of who you are, the type Christian that you are. They emphasize these things that men, fleshly men like them, corrupt men like them emphasize. See? And that's how you can kind of hoodwink. Isn't that how these false teachers get these stadiums filled? Is that they bless and they prosper everybody. Now, of course, nobody's getting prospered but them. But anyway, they slick now. But everything's beautiful. Y'all are great. And just, and they please everybody. And people like that. See? They asked Joel Osteen, now what do you think about homosexuality? He said, well, now wait a minute. Now that right there, I believe, is a subject that each person has. What? You see, boy, that stadium, he'd see that stadium go down if he was to say one word about homosexuality. Well, he did not. So he just, boy, and they said, well, now, I guess what we're trying to get at, there's criticism on y'all, men like yourselves, these prosperity preachers, that you won't take a line on these hard times. Well, it's not that. What we do, we're not the judges, but the Lord is, you see, just all over the place. He won't say homosexual is a sin because that cut that stadium in half. Well, that's what we're dealing with here. These men who boast in appearance, see, and not in heart. So we get down here, and he starts to identify who he's been talking to and talking about all along. That these little thoughts from the opening of this book in talking about the carnality and these boastings and all of these type things, I believe he's referring to these people who've come in and influenced the church. It seems so. When he gets down and explains at at verse 12 of chapter 11, he talks about what I did. Now, y'all may have blamed me for this. It seems I didn't take money from you guys because what I did, I cut off an opportunity for those who want to have high regard among you in the things in which they boast. Now, see, they can't talk about I've been in the sea, I've been beaten with rods. That ain't what. Oh no, that ain't no. This is how many. I'm a Hebrew. My lineage is strong, Corinthians, and and they orators, they great orators, it seems. And so that they coming from that perspective. Well, Paul cuts the leg out from under them. So they want to be like us. Well, no support. When he'd struggle along there, he'd be working, he'd need something, he's struggling. The church at Macedonia would come and provide it. See, the other churches would help out while he was there, while he worked among them. No support. Well, these infiltrators, they ain't going to go down that road. That's a steep road to not get no support. You know what you mean? That's a big problem. And so I believe that's what he says. Y'all probably have had time to consider that point. Any comments or questions along those lines? I really believe that's one of the reasons he didn't take support, is that they wanted regard in what they were boasting in. See, now here's Paul done been through some stuff, and yet he wouldn't take any support from them as he worked among them. Well, see, anybody that come in there and don't start taking credit for Paul's and them work and all that, well, it would show a pretty big line there that this man was struggling here. Wouldn't even take funds from us. And then here's these that it seems doing just the opposite, really taking advantage of them. See, and so Paul, there's a clear line drawn. And Paul boasted about this throughout Achaia. What's the point? It seems to me that, see, that way they could, he just kill it right there where it was. Now, we're not told specifically, but I believe that's really the implication, because he emphasizes, if you notice, as the truth of Christ is in me, no one shall stop me from this boasting in the regions of Achaia. See? I'm going to tell Achaia, see, where y'all at? Here in this area here. Corinth was central in that. And so these brethren, he would tell others about it, see, throughout the region, about the fact they would be privy to the fact that Paul wasn't taking support over there. No support as he worked. He did without. And then he said when it got bad, brethren came and supported him, is really what it seems like, because he talks about it. And I say that just because when I was present with you, verse 9, and in need, what I lacked, the brethren came from Macedonia and supplied. Now, he might have just been simply saying, I took support from them all the way. But it really seems to me like he worked among them, struggled and worked. He says that really in the first chapter. They conditioned there, they worked and labored. They did that at Thessalonica too, if you remember, because he wanted to show them that a man need to get up and go to work every day and earn his keep. And he didn't take support at Thessalonica as well. See, that he's demonstrating his authority as an apostle and showing people how they ought to live. He's not dismissing what the Lord said, that those who preach the gospel, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, should live of the gospel. And that if a person, that a laborer, he says in Matthew chapter 10, that the laborer is worthy of his wages. Without question, a preacher ought to be supported all along, supported well and doing well. That's Christ's will. That's our Lord's will, that preachers be supported. And see, and Paul says, yet I didn't use any of these things while among these brethren here. One of the reasons, at least, might be the sole reason, but at least he cut the legs out from under those false pretenders that had come in among them, claiming apostolic authority, claiming to be, he'll say at verse 13, apostles. Paul labeled them. Finally, we find out who it is he's been talking about. I wondered it all the way through. When I was studying this back at chapter 5, I thought, man, he's been talking about these people from the opening of this book. I saw just in undertones of his concern that they not buying into him, into what he taught. And I'm going, why? What's the point? Right here. The folks were there. People were on the ground. These false apostles, he says, at verse 13, for such, he says, are false apostles. For such. I looked at this carefully. You test this. I think that reaches all the way back up here. When he says, you know, if he who comes preaches another Jesus whom we've not preached, he's scared they'd embrace it. Or another spirit, verse 4, a different gospel that you've not accepted, you may well put up with it. I'm not behind these super apostles, the most eminent apostles. I'm untrained in speech. Now, They may not be, but not in knowledge. And I didn't take any support because I wanted to cut the legs out from under them. 12. And then 13, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no wonder, he says, because Satan himself, right, transforms himself into an angel of light. And his ministers, therefore it's no great thing, verse 15, if his ministers also transform his who? His ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. Now God's going to get them. Don't question that. Now this thing going to come to a bad end for these bad actors. But while we're talking about them, he says, now they just as false as a $3 bill. They ain't nothing real about them. He says, in fact, they deceitful workers. That these boastings in appearance, that's baloney. Jesus said, don't draw attention to yourself when you do your alms, when you pray, when you fast, all of those good principles that the Lord himself told his disciples in the mountain and off the mountain. Be pure, be sincere in what you do. Worship God in heart. It don't matter what you wear. And don't be scared of men either, because they can't do anything to you but kill you. Fear him, he says, who can cast both soul and body into hell. Fear the Lord. Now that's what Paul had been teaching. That's what the apostles taught. But here's men come in and says, no, Paul looks pretty bad, don't he? His physical appearance, boy, he is really messed up. And they come in and they'd say, Paul can't, you notice his talk? He ain't no big, y'all notice that he struggled, he ain't no big trained speaker. Ain't got 10 seconds to do with faithfulness. But they've slickly brought in this sinister doctrine of emphasizing fleshly pursuits, fleshly endeavors, speech, appearance, and let us not ever get caught up in those kinds of things, because Joel Osteen them are just they denominational examples of this, but there's Church of Christ examples of this as well. Let us never overemphasize big name preachers and that kind of baloney. That what we want, what this church here did a good job of our whole lives, since everybody that's been here, a lot of our good people, older ones that's gone and died on ahead of us. But what we've done well here is through the years, we'd have Brother Maples, Brother Hutto, then we'd have Brother Maples, and then we'd have Brother Hutto. Then next year, we come along here and guess who? Hiram Hutto. Oh, okay, Hiram. Then next thing you know, we look around here and this thing, we back to Brother Maples. Then we back to Hiram Hutto. Oh, well, Brother Weiser come through. Good man, ain't no question about it. Then we'd have, next time we'd have Brother Weiser. That's all we've ever done here. That what we've done, the elders were wise in making sure that these men we know what's going to come out of their mouths, and we know what they stand for. They got clean lives. We're not wondering. We just didn't do many visitors. Carol, the wisdom behind that, we know these men. And when they in here among us, see, we don't have to wonder. Now, a lot of good men preaching the gospel. A lot of good, and they might be leading good, clean lives for all we know. But the point is, we didn't test all that here. And we've all been well served by that approach too. That the reason we had them 50 times is because we know them, we know how they lived, and so we didn't have to worry about no kind of shenanigans when they were here. Now when you new people, ain't a thing in the world wrong with new people. But the issue becomes, does their lives match the gospel? Because they could get in here, teach our kids something they don't need, at dinner table sitting there, and all of a sudden we find out, they weak in areas. We don't find it out, the families find it out that eat with them, you see. And next thing you know, that's the influence. But this church has stood because of that kind of wisdom through the years. So these boasters, verse 18, we've emphasized, we won't comment on it because they boast in according to the flesh. You see, that's what we've been talking about. And Paul expresses this concern again. See, at verse 4, he says, you may well put up with it. And then verse 19, he says, for you put up with fools gladly, since you yourselves are wise. Now, were they really wise? Looks like sarcasm here to me. Y'all so smart. Y'all sharp as a tack. See, y'all sharp as a tack. So y'all put up with fools. Now, a smart person wouldn't put up with fools. They wouldn't buy into this baloney. But he said, y'all so wise, Corinthians. Y'all on the ball. See? And so you'd put your head down when you read that. Well, you got this letter, and the man, maybe he's reading to the congregation, and Paul says, you put up with fools gladly. And the church heard that. You see? You put up with fools. You so wise, he would say. Boy, Paul, he didn't play around, did he? He says, and these men mistreated them. This is what happens, though. Parents can relate to this. When you try to discipline your kids and you love them, do all you can for them, they'll embrace somebody that ain't up to no good. You see? Paul says, you put up with it if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face. Now they can swing on you. They can beat you. I mean, they devour you. I mean, you got nothing left. They take advantage of you. Paul said they cheat you, and you put up with that kind of stuff. You see why he says, open your way back. Open your hearts to us. Open your hearts to us. Don't limit yourselves. He says, now it's not us. You limited by your own affections toward us. See, but there is this. The devil does tempt good people. See, to resent good. Sound advice, good hard work, and now rebuke comes in. See, brethren, everybody claims to lack rebuke, and nobody can stand it. Like you get on to a brother or say something, or correct a brother, he'll resent the daylights out of you for it. That's the truth about it. Now but oh boy, hey, you be my friend if you just correct me, and people can't stand correction. But they love, do you be my friend? I love, every preacher that stands up, they say that. And you say something to them, and you can see they crossways with you the rest of the way. Now, that's what Paul talking about here. Men, these boasters in appearance, say, not in good, solid work, or really looking at what a man has gone through, the hardships. But that ain't what they emphasize. They emphasize their lineage, how well they speak. Now, so Paul engages them, doesn't he? He says, well, Verse 18, seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast. Okay. Let me engage. He's done already pleaded with him to just bear with me in a little foolishness earlier. So he's going to show the Corinthians the type person that he is versus them. Now he says at verse 21, we too weak to treat you like they did. I think that's what verse 21 says. To our shame, he doesn't, this is sarcasm. To our shame, I say that we were too weak for that. But in whatever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. So when he says you put up with it, if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, one strikes you on the face, he says, to our shame, I say that we were too weak for that. See? Now, we couldn't do you like that. But he's making, so we must have been weak as water. We didn't do y'all like that. You see, how did we do you? Well, we treated you with respect. We taught you the truth and tried to help you. But now here's these that would eat you up, devour you, take from you, cheat from you. Boy, y'all smart. Y'all like that. Y'all put up with that. And we's too weak to do it, he says. I think that's what he says there. He says, now, but they bold, right? Well, me too. And he says, they Hebrews, me too. So am I. Israelites, so am I. Seed of Abraham, so am I. See, case closed. Now, well, no, Paul says, are they ministers of Christ? And then he says, now, I speak as a fool. And I think the suggestion there is, they ain't no more ministers of Christ than a man on the moon. They ain't nothing minister about them except ministers of Satan, which he's called them already. You see? But he says, are they ministers of Christ? He says, I am more. And then, is that a colon or a semicolon? I forget now. Them two little dots. See, some of my little English people. All right, so here's a semicolon. And then he lists off all these ministerial things. Are they ministers of Christ? I more, semicolon. And he starts to list off. Now, see, here's the contrast. They not nothing. They ain't done nothing. When he says, I more, he's being sarcastic here. See, remember, whatever any is bold, I speak foolishly, I'm bold also. And then he says, they ministers of Christ, I speak as a fool. I'm more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times. I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times, he says, I was beaten with rods. Once, I was stoned. That's at Lystra, isn't it? 3 times, he says, I was shipwrecked. And a day and a night I've been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils, he says, among false brethren, in weariness and toil, and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, besides the other things, what comes upon me daily, my deep concern, he says, for all the churches. Who's weak, he says, and I'm not weak. Who's made to stumble, and I do not burn with indignation. If I must boast, I'll boast in the things which concern my infirmity. So, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I'm more. And then let me show you. Here's their boast. They Hebrews, they Israelites. He said, but then he gets to the point. But what are they ministers of Christ? What about their work and service to God? They are? Oh, me too. Let me show you. And you look at that list, you see, and you look over there at the false apostle. He shined up. He ain't done nothing. You ain't never seen him do nothing. He just shined up over there, and you start, now you want to see, be easy to see, boy. You think, man, one, nobody's ready to go down this road. See, not even hardly faith, good, strong Christians. Hard to walk in this road, isn't it? See. And so Paul shows this thing out, these boastings. But you notice now, Paul didn't say, I've taught 5,383 sermons. And I've prayed 4,555 times. And I've led singing 998 times. And just me and little old 2 or 3 of us out here somewhere. And what else I've done, you might notice, you notice it ain't them kind of things. That it's not, and all them would be good acts of service, wouldn't they? Preachings and leadings and things like that. All that's good. That ain't where he went. He put this thing to sleep, to rest, because these physical-minded, carnal thinkers, Paul says, are they ministers of Christ, though, people? I know what they boasted in. What about, they serve Jesus? They workers for Christ? They servants, special servants of his, these apostles? Is that what they are? Me too. And then he's I'm more. And then he lists these things. See, in needs and hungers and thirstings, in fastings. Incidentally, you notice, when I see that, fasting stand out because brethren argue we don't fast today. You only know how you could read that and say that. What else in that list we don't do? What else we don't do in that list? Paul fasted, churches fasted, brethren fasted in Acts, all over the book of Acts. And brethren said, no, we don't fast today. Really? Really? We certainly ought to follow Paul's examples. Be ye followers of me. We do it on everything else, but they get to fasting somehow and say, well, no, not today. We don't fast today. That's they can't explain it, so we don't do it. Does that seem like an Old Testament type thing? Something, whatever brethren say. But anyway, fastings is authorized by the apostle, approved example right here. Truth about it. But be that as it may, this is a strong list. We won't emphasize these things because his point here isn't to emphasize the things. The point here is to show these things here. We ministers of Christ, but all of these things here reflect our need for God. See, when we in the water, and we ain't got no food, we hungering and thirsting. And then when we doing without food, fasting. All of these things reflect, these affirmatives, these things reflect our need for God. See, they don't show our power in any way. That stoning, that beatdown he got at Lystra, left for dead. How he get up out of that thing? Paul saw the need. The Lord delivered him, didn't he? You see, in deaths often, he said, you see. And so, and that's what he means, I'm pretty sure, over here at chapter 12, isn't it? Therefore, I take pleasure, verse 10, in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. See, because as my reliance is upon Jesus Christ and his sufficient grace. My grace. Paul wants this thorn in the flesh removed. It's a problem. A messenger of Satan has been sent to buffet him. It's a problem. Paul asked for it to be removed. The Lord said, no, 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 3 times Paul said, I asked him, and the Lord told him, my grace is sufficient for you. See, my grace, see, I can get you through this, Paul, because my strength is made perfect in weakness. See, so when you out here in the water ain't got no way out, see, and he 3 times out here in the sea. Just once would have been enough, wouldn't it? But he 3 times out here in the water, out here in the deep, and ain't no help out there, is it? We all know what it's like, or at least most of us do, to be out in the water. You see real quick, boy, if something goes south, ain't much to help us out here. It don't take long to drown either. That you see your need for the Lord, you just pray and ask for his help and strength. Because ain't a thing in the world you can do if you get out there in that ocean having to battle the tide and current and all. Helpless. And so these things here, he says, he'll talk about them in these boastings, and this is enough, this is plenty to show these pretenders up. These ministers of Christ, he says, I speak as a fool. But they boast, I more, and then he breaks off this famous list that we tremble at, all of us, when we see what this man was willing to do for the cause of Christ, to get people the gospel. And now, incidentally, this isn't my tar broke down. Don't you? So, brethren, I've heard brethren, say, we all go through troubles, and they talking about their tire broke down, or the car quit, But this is in his service to God. Are they ministers of Christ? I more. And these things here is in his work in the Lord. Say, not the little times and chances that happen to all of us. That's my buddy's thoughts. Yes, sir.
Just when they were lost, there is no point of direction. And at all, I can't remember where scripturally, somebody else knows. There was no moon and stars. The clouds covered the moon and stars for several nights. They had no way to chart a course of where they were at. Being lost on land, you got a sense of direction. You know you're going somewhere. But without the moon and the stars to chart with a sextant, they didn't have a clue.
Well, you hit it.
Lost, literally, no direction.
You see the need, don't you, Glenn, for God? Only source of strength out there. See? And so, any comments, questions along these lines? Any thoughts or anything?
You're going to get to the point here in chapter 12. But back to your earlier point about, when people rebuke and things like that, you think people would love you more, but they love you less. In chapter 12.
That's right.
You do the things to try to help people, they think you don't.
The very people that really love people, folks resent them. And they love people who pat them on the back and brag on them and all. That's just the truth. It's just how brethren are. And you see that a lot of times. Look what Paul is feeling. I'll read it, Jeremy. Verse 15 is what Jeremy has reference to of chapter 12. And I'll very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. See, that's what Paul's trying to help. But then he says, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I'm loved. See, you can't win that for losing. Men will work, labor with a group. And I've seen that, through the years. People love something new. Now, the man that's there working with them, been helping them, done raised their kids and all that. People want somebody else. You know, they want a different person in here. Now, this person raised their kids, taught them the gospel, taught the whole family the gospel, taught the whole church the gospel. But they, brethren, start clamoring for somebody else. You know, something new. Say, the more abundantly I love you, the less I'm loved. That's what he's talking about, isn't it? Without question. But it is something that men, Brother Hall, I'm sure, has dealt with that in his life. That men that preach the gospel, I'm certain, feel that and can see it because they deal with the resentment. Brethren holding, you know, because they've taught something, or maybe you correct them on a point, and that brethren can't hardly get, they hold it against you. Things like that. Now, shame on them, but they do. Any other comments or anything? I appreciate y'all's good comments, Glenn, Jeremy, and Lord willing, we'll pick back up at chapter 12, because the end of this chapter basically is just him detailing an event that happens in his life.